When you light someone else's path, you brighten your own. Even in dark and challenging days, we see neighbors helping neighbors, people stepping up in sacrificial service and selfless leadership. Indeed, we see the best of the human spirit in our country. Americans are engaging in philanthropy, sharing their love of humankind, giving and volunteering. Let's work together. Let's unite with the hope and faith that brighter days are ahead. Let's seek solutions for the issues that face us. Let's shine the light on what we share in common, rather than on what might divide us. Let's be one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Philanthropy does indeed represent the best of the human spirit. Good morning. I'm Harry Chapman with Lighthouse Counsel, Senior Consultant, broadcasting live from the offices of Bone McAllister Norton Law in downtown Nashville. On behalf of Lighthouse Counsel and our media sponsor, the Nashville Post, welcome to the Giving USA 2021 Nashville Briefing. Giving USA is the longest-running and most comprehensive report on the sources and use of charitable giving in America. It is published by the Giving USA Foundation, a public service initiative of the Giving Institute, of which Lighthouse Counsel is a proud member firm. Today, you will hear from two of Giving USA's lead researchers who will break down the recently released Giving USA 2021 report and provide critical insights on current economic developments and donor trends. Dr. Una Osili, Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, has more than 2 decades of experience in leadership, economic policy, and research across the public and private sectors. And Dr. Anna Pruitt, Managing Editor of Giving USA, has dedicated her career to managing and translating complex research into insight practitioners can put into action. Following will be a brief discussion with leading global experts on philanthropy and social innovation, moderated by Geert D. Lombardi, editor of the Nashville Post. We welcome and appreciate all speakers and participants and panelists participating today and look forward to hearing more insights this morning. Also, we encourage attendees to ask questions throughout the program. If you have questions during any part of the presentation today, please type them into the control panel. We will address these during and after the presentations. Now, without further ado, let's get started with our speakers, Dr. Una Osili and Dr. Anna Pruitt, coming to you live from Indiana University. But first, a word from our media sponsor, Nashville Post.
Good morning, Una. I believe we are both on and we are both ready to get going on this presentation today about Giving USA. I will turn it over to you, and I think we're all excited to hear about these results.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to join all of you from the Lilly Family School. We are delighted and honored to have this opportunity and want to emphasize that Giving USA is the longest and most comprehensive report on charitable giving. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that we are doing this in Nashville and providing these results. The report was just launched earlier this month, so you are among the first in the country to have access to the deeper dives that we will provide today. I'm really excited and look forward to not just sharing this information, but also hearing your questions, your comments, and the insights that you will take away from today's presentation. We're going to start with sharing the findings. And the next slide, these are the most important results. The top line message from Giving USA 2021 about 2020 is that we reached an all-time high of $471.44 billion. This is a new record for charitable giving in a year marked by uncertainty, an unprecedented health crisis, a global movement around racial and social justice, and an economic crisis of untold proportions. We had Americans of all different backgrounds stepping up. Now, to better understand these results, let's start with the biggest slice of the pie. One of the surprises to many every single year is that Americans of all different backgrounds, so individual giving still comprises the largest slice of American philanthropy at 69%. That includes large gifts, but also gifts that come from Americans of all different backgrounds. And one of the key messages we heard throughout 2020 was, despite the challenges, despite the hardships that many communities faced, we also saw an outpouring of generosity in communities around the country. And I'm sure Nashville was no different. Foundations have the second largest slice of the pie, and that amount of $88.55 billion is a new record. We also saw that foundations stepped up, not just in their giving, but also in the types of grants they made, with a leaning in towards unrestricted support for nonprofits, more flexible forms of funding, and increasingly attention to grassroots and community-based organizations. So a real focus on communities in 2020. Charitable bequests reached a large share of giving at 9%. And to put that in perspective, we know that charitable bequests are a big part of the sector. And with our aging demographic in the US, we expect that charitable bequests will continue to play a role. And then finally, corporations. Again, in 2020, we saw many corporations initiate new programs, expand workplace giving programs, but also community grants focused on COVID response and a response to racial equity and social justice. So $471.44 billion, a new record for giving. Lots to be encouraged about as we look back, but also to understand that this was not possible without the hard work of many nonprofits around the country. There are more than 1.3 million nonprofits of all different types. And throughout 2020, many nonprofits showed resilience and innovation, not just in fundraising, but in pivoting to meet the needs of communities. And this includes organizations of all different types. On the next slide, we will show you just the top line results in terms of where all of that charitable contribution dollars, where did all those go? And just very quickly, by far the biggest slice of the pie goes to religious congregations at 28%, and followed by education. We also saw in the current environment that human service nonprofits played a vital role in responding to the rising levels of unemployment, housing insecurity, and many other issues facing communities. But we also saw large gifts taking place across many different sectors, including umbrella organizations like United Ways in the public society benefit column. So overall, a record year for giving. Many nonprofits of all different sizes and sectors contributed to making this possible. And as we look ahead to 2021, we're also aware that that innovation, that resilience that many nonprofits demonstrated in 2020 will need to continue as we continue in many communities to deal with the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis and also many other challenges facing communities. On the next slide, every year our team works really hard to go through all the Giving USA data, and there is a lot of data to unpack, and we come up with the top, usually it's 10 findings, the top 10, and we share them with all of our audiences. But today we have a time constraint because there's an exciting panel coming up afterwards. So we have limited ourselves to the top 8 findings. And we are really excited to share these because these are the messages that you can all use as you go into your day-to-day work following this presentation. So I will start with the first few findings and turn it over to Dr. Anna Pruitt. So first, giving reached a new record. This is probably the most important finding, but it was made possible by an expansion in generosity. So we saw individuals step up in their giving. We saw foundations grow at a record 17%. Charitable bequests also grew. The only component of charitable giving that did not increase was corporate giving. A lot of that was due to the role of the economy. So this gets us to the very next point. Just one quick point. When we compare the giving landscape in 2020 to what it looked like 20, 30, or even 40 years ago, I just want to stress what has changed and what has stayed the same. First, individuals still make up the lion's share of American philanthropy. This is very good news for many nonprofits because if you want to engage individuals at all different levels, this is a really good message for all of you. When we share this data, we emphasize that if you take the individual segment, half of the foundation segment, which is made up of family foundations, and the charitable bequest, you would have something like 88 or 89% of all giving being attributed to individuals. By far, the biggest change in the charitable map is the role that foundations play today. In the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we saw that foundations occupied only 6% of giving. And so foundations have increased their footprint, but we also know that in 2020, foundations innovated in how they gave. As I mentioned, a rise in more unrestricted types of support, more flexible funding, and more responsive philanthropy based on trust. As we look ahead, we know that corporate giving is also an area where we've seen a lot of innovation. Although corporate giving was about the same slice of the pie today as it was in 1980, we know that corporations are changing their models, becoming more strategic in their philanthropy, expanding workplace programs, matching programs. And we've also seen in this period growth in cause marketing and many other areas of giving. On the next slide, you may ask, what made the results of 2020 possible? The expansion in generosity we see was primarily due to a number of factors, and I just want to outline them because, as many of us know, 2020 was an unprecedented year. We say that often, but let me go a bit deeper to explain. First, a global pandemic of proportions that we haven't seen for 100 years. Many nonprofits of all different kinds had to adjust to this health crisis, both in terms of their own internal operations, but also in dealing with the challenges facing communities. The second is the rise of racial equity and social justice issues in philanthropy. We saw many Americans of all different backgrounds, not just giving to support and advance racial and social justice, but also advocating. This was also true for corporations and foundations. And finally, the environment in 2020 was characterized by economic challenges, specifically high levels of unemployment, a decline in GDP of about 3.5%. And towards the end of the year, we started to see recovery. As vaccines became more available, individuals and businesses started to go back to work. And we also saw the impact of the federal government's interventions, specifically the PPP dollars for businesses and the federal stimulus dollars. Towards the end of the year, we also had a very strong financial market picture. Specifically, the stock market rebounded, growing at a rate of 16.3%. And as we look at the environment in 2021, we're seeing vaccines become more available, more optimism as many Americans return to in-person activities. Nonprofits are beginning to manage this transition, developing hybrid models of engagement. And finally, we're also seeing economic recovery take place in 2021, and projections are that this will continue. So what I'd like to share with you as we look back at 2020 and even into 2021 and beyond, the biggest factor, obviously, is the role that the economy will play. People give when they feel financially and economically secure. But we also know that the strong financial markets have a very important influence on charitable giving. Towards the end of the year, the stock market grew. We also saw that personal disposable income grew last year. Many Americans who were in a position to give because they had accumulated savings, they were working from home, and they had lower expenses because they had lower commuting expenses and fewer expenses on eating out, and many other discretionary sources of income have now accumulated those savings and are very interested in allocating some of those dollars to charitable causes. So this is really good news for all of us in the charitable sector, although we are still facing a challenging economic environment and health environment. We also have a number of opportunities to engage donors, many of whom are in a position to give and who have expressed already in 2020 a need and an interest in the charitable sector. Let's go to the third finding. Now, as I mentioned, although 2020 was a strong year for philanthropy in terms of this expansion, it was also an uneven year. Foundations by far had the biggest growth at 17%. This was primarily driven by the strong stock market, as I mentioned, in 2020, but also the responsiveness that foundations showed at the community level. The results from foundations are spread across independent foundations as well as community foundations. When we look back at 2020, really a strong role for foundations, which we expect to continue given the overall trends in the stock market. In terms of individual giving, I want to stress individual giving also grew, but you can see that the growth was not as strong, primarily because we had uneven trends. While some households saw their incomes increase, their savings increase, we also had a segment of American society that faced economic challenges, rising unemployment, layoffs at work, or the inability to work remotely. So combined, we did have an uneven picture, but also a very strong response by households who were in a position to give. Finally, charitable bequests had a very strong year at close to a growth of 10%. And the only segment that really saw a decline was the corporate sector, again, due to the unevenness in the economic picture. While the tech sector and some parts of the financial sector had a strong year, we did not see all corporations end the year in a positive role. In fact, for 2020, corporate profits actually declined. But as we look to 2021, we're seeing that many corporations are seeing a rebound in their profits. This is more broad-based across the service sector, in many other areas that had travel, that had seen downturns in 2020 have started to see an uptick. So as we look ahead to 2021, I think the overall picture looks quite favorable for philanthropy. Now, just a few more quick points before I turn it over to Dr. Anna Pruitt. One question we get asked a lot as we think about the future of philanthropy, or just what will happen in 2021 and beyond, is what indicators to watch. Very often we're asked, what should I be looking at as I try to understand the climate for giving in 2021 and beyond? One factor that really stands out is the role of the economy, and specifically financial markets. We know that as over time, we've seen a very strong link between the stock market and giving. Generally, this is because if you think about the foundation sector, they tend to give out of their assets. And so when the stock market is strong, that has a strong indication. And this is also true for many Americans who hold assets in the financial market. I do want to stress, however, that giving does tend to be a lagging indicator. In other words, people wait to see the recovery first before they allocate those charitable dollars. And so this is certainly a favorable environment as we look at 2021 and beyond. On the next slide, here is a bit of a call to action for all of us listening today. For a long time, many have watched the growth in the philanthropic sector. Over time, we've seen giving grow. But one metric that has stayed relatively constant is the share of giving as a fraction of the overall economy. That has stayed at roughly 2%. And so this year, we did see an uptick in the share of giving in the overall economy at 2.3%. But this is not all good news. We did see an expansion in generosity, but it was at a time when incomes actually contracted. So the challenge for all of us on the call, on the webinar today is, what would we have to do differently to continue to inspire Americans to give, and also to give in a time not just of crisis, but also during a recovery period? Is that something that all of us can play a role in? So I want to encourage all of us to think about how we can step up, not just in terms of our own personal giving, but also the work that we do in philanthropy to encourage continued growth and continued expansion in generosity beyond 2020. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Anna Pruitt, and she will take us through the next set of findings.
Thank you so much, Una. So Una talked a lot about what's happening on the sources side of the equation, and I now have the opportunity to speak to you about where all those charitable dollars went. And what we saw was broad-based growth. 7 of the 9 subsectors actually grew, and for several of the subsectors, they grew by 8% or more. So that's pretty substantial, strong growth that we're seeing. There were 2 subsectors that did not see growth: health and giving to arts, culture, and humanities organizations. However, when we look at the 2-year growth rate, that's positive in current dollars and about flat for those 2 organizations over that 2-year period. So the top line finding here is relatively broad growth. In particular, we can see that public society benefit sector really being the most prominent bar there. And that's because it grew 15.7% last year over 2019. As again, a bit of a reminder, public society benefit includes United Ways, Jewish federations, civil rights organizations, and community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, which were one of the areas that received a lot of funding from the financial sector in order to help economic development in traditionally underserved communities. And we also saw people like Mackenzie Scott making substantial gifts to those economic development organizations. In addition, organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund are here under Public Society Benefit. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund had a strong year of giving, starting with a $40 million anonymous donation. And then in the wake of that tremendous civil rights movement that we saw and that racial justice movement that we saw in the summer of 2020, the organization received a lot more gifts, including from corporations such as City National Bank, as well as individuals, including Michael Jordan, who donated $1 million, and Angelina Jolie, who donated $200,000. Finally, in this category, we're also seeing national donor advised funds are being counted here. So Fidelity Charitable, Vanguard Charitable, Schwab, all of those are under that public society benefit sector. We know that there was a big movement for people to give from their donor advised funds. And in addition, there was large gifts to donor advised funds, according to several reports from around the field. Another area that saw strong growth was education, which grew 9%. Giving to historically Black colleges and universities in particular soared in 2020. Reed Hastings, the co-founder of Netflix, and his wife, Patty Quillen, gave $120 million to various HBCUs, and Mackenzie Scott gave over $800 million to HBCUs, tribal colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, and community colleges. So there was really a response, as Una mentioned, to that enormous amount of activity that occurred in 2020. Donors really responded to the environment. Now, we heard that there's widespread growth. So you might ask, well, how did this happen? Especially because we know that there was widespread impact in the sector. So a study released in June 2020 found that 90% of nonprofits had to cancel or postpone fundraising events, and 81% had to reduce programs or services. So how did this growth happen? Well, as Una mentioned, it happened largely because of the people who are on this call and people like you. It happened because of innovation from nonprofit organizations. So any kind of pivot to that online services, we know, was a really important factor in helping organizations recover. In addition, we saw growth in things like crowdfunding and mutual aid campaigns. In particular, there was large crowdfunding campaigns for COVID-19. One example is the Navajo and Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund, which raised $6.37 million, which was particularly important for supporting Indigenous communities that were disproportionately affected by COVID. Finally, several reports around the field indicated that there was an influx of new donors. People were responding to the crises and the various issues that they saw arise in 2020. And that lets us know that this is potentially a time for nonprofits to think about how can they retain those relationships with those new donors, and how can we build toward a more generous world where people are understanding that the need persists for so many of these organizations. So according to our sixth finding, human services organizations grew 9.7% in 2020, reaching a new high of $65.14 billion. So we heard many reports from around the field that giving, especially to things like food banks, were growing quite strongly. So one survey found that there was a 128.6% increase in contributions to a range of food banks of all sizes. And this giving was spurred on by a 600% increase in the number of new donors. So again, referencing that previous slide, we're seeing that people responded strongly to the events of 2020 and wanted to help. So that is a great success story. And it's further buoyed by the fact that we're seeing that many food banks and other kinds of human services organizations are reporting that funding didn't flag at the end of the year. In fact, it actually went up for some organizations. Now, with that said, it's very important to highlight the fact that there was increased need as well. So another report found that 79% of housing and homeless agencies actually had to disrupt their services and again, pivot and find new ways to do things. We're also seeing a growth in the percentage of Americans that are hungry. So although there was enormous giving to this human services sector, the need is still there. And we are hopeful for the future that donors continue to respond to it. There is some good anecdotal evidence on that front so far in 2021. One New Jersey food bank reported that 36% of donors who gave for the first time in 2020 had already made another gift this year in 2021. Now, the seventh finding is about the arts and culture and humanities sector. Unfortunately, growth did not reach every single one of the sectors this year, and we did see declines in this area. Really, the effect of the closing of theaters can simply not be overstated. The Americans for Arts organization actually released a finding that said, listen, if you counted every seat in every theater in all of America that would have been filled if it were not for the COVID-19 pandemic, you would have 448 million audience members that unfortunately were just not able to happen in 2020. So there was 448 million in lost audiences, and that all of those or all of those performances are opportunities for organizations to remind their patrons how important they are and how important funding them are. So we really can't overemphasize how important it was to the arts organization that the shutdowns had such a deep impact on this area. However, there are some bright spots. So for instance, the New York Philharmonic has an annual gala, which is normally limited to 2,700 people. Well, they brought that gala online this year and they had 90,000 people participate. So that is pretty incredible when we think about the range of people and the number of people who are able to attend an event that previously was quite small. In addition, the San Francisco Ballet had an emergency fundraiser, and they found that 58% of donors to this critical relief fund were first-time donors, and they were giving between $5 and $25. So obviously, audiences missed arts organizations and wanted to have an opportunity to give back. So we are eager to see if the recovery in 2021 for this sector happens, and we certainly are hoping to see that. Finally, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, but online giving accounts for a growing share of giving. And not only that, but that giving is increasingly on mobile devices. So the share of online donations made through a mobile device actually grew almost 8% in 2020. And right now, a total of donations made by mobile devices is 28%. So that range continues to grow. And I think that lets us know that immediacy is particularly important to people who are giving online. And although we see that it is still a relatively small share at 13%, I think an important thing to note is that another study found that it's the most common way to give online. The most common way that people are making a donation is online. So perhaps they're not making all of their largest gifts there, but it seems that the majority of donors are making online gifts at some point during the year. So this area will continue to be important. And we can also see that it grew strongly over time. Then that's driven in part by online giving days, things like Giving Tuesday. As you may remember, Giving Tuesday Now, which happened in May 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, actually raised $503 million in online donations, which was similar to what was raised just a few months earlier on Giving Tuesday 2019. Then Giving Tuesday in November of 2020 came around and smashed all those previous records with a total of $2.47 billion and 808 million coming in from online donations. So not only is online giving growing, but one of the things we saw on that Giving Tuesday is that the number of participants in 2020 also grew 29% over 2019. So again, people are giving online, and that is going to be something that organizations should be considering. So as we look forward to 2021 and beyond, we have a couple of themes that we've taken away from our research. The first is the role of technology. And of course, that isn't just how to reach donors, but also how to raise funds. Again, thinking about those online annual galas and whether or not they are a good fit for your organization, I think that's something that organizations are really going to have to consider going forward. Additionally, demographic changes. Millennials are now the largest adult generation, and a study from our school found that crowdfunding donors were more likely to be younger and also less likely to be married. So there's an opportunity to think about how to reach out to those different kinds of demographics. That's on one side. On the other side of the equation, we have baby boomers and the silent generation, which are still quite a large share of the population at 28% of Americans that are now 55 or older. So we see that there are a range of different kinds of donors and it's important to make sure that your organization is reaching out to all of them. And that brings us to this final point, which is about new giving vehicles. As mentioned, donor advised funds are not going to go anywhere. They continue to be more and more popular over time. So those are the kinds of things that organizations should be considering. And then finally, we really saw some growth in planned giving. We saw that Free Will, the online will-making platform that allows people to leave a charitable bequest, saw an increase of 600% for will-making in the 1 week in March of 2020 as compared with the previous year. So people had an incredible interest in planned giving, and not only in bequests, but also in different kinds of giving, such as giving from a retirement plan, giving from an IRA. Another study found that over half of the donors who had reached out to planned giving organizations had actually said that they were interested in some of those less traditional mechanisms, like those retirement plans. So we know that all of these different giving vehicles will be increasingly important as donors want to leverage all of their assets to give to charity and make the world a bit better. So that wraps up our presentation, and we are eager to field your questions and hear a bit more about your reactions to our findings.
Thank you, Dr. Anna Pruitt, and thank you to all of you who've sent in such interesting and insightful questions. I have been monitoring the chat and really very pleased to see the engagement that all of you have shown throughout the webinar. I will start with just the very first question, and then I will turn it also over to Dr. Anna Pruitt. We had one question come in about the pie chart and the shares of giving and whether we've seen changes during the pandemic. I just want to emphasize that Giving USA, of course, goes back such a long way, so we can actually see what areas of giving have changed over time. Religious giving by far is the biggest shift that we've seen. In the 1950s and 60s, religious giving or giving to religious congregations was 2/3 of overall giving, meaning the majority, the bulk of American charitable giving was directed at congregations. Today, that has been a big shift, a big disruption, you could see, with 28% of all giving going to religious congregations. During the pandemic, religious congregations have also had to pivot to more online giving platforms and also online services and community building online. So there is a lot of opportunity for religious congregations we've certainly seen over time. So that is the first question that came in, was about what shifts have we seen and how has the pie chart changed? Let me ask my colleague, Dr. Anna Pruitt, to chime in on the next question, which asks about the percentage of giving that is more political in nature and what we know about the relationship between political giving and charitable giving.
Absolutely. So as a reminder, we don't count political giving in Giving USA. We're counting only charitable giving. Now, it's a little bit tricky to say what percentage of giving might be motivated by political opinions and political feelings. However, one of the things that we can say is that the existing research indicates to us that they don't compete with each other. So another way to say that is, if someone makes a political donation, it means that it means that they're not unlikely to give to a charity. They're thinking of those as kind of different buckets. So they're still likely to give to a charity, even if they give to a political cause. And, you know, in some cases, we've even found that there might be a slightly positive relationship. That is to say, you might be even more likely to give to charity if you give to a political cause. So there's some really interesting correlations there. And we're curious to hear more about that over time.
Wonderful. The next question is also a very interesting one. It asks about the foundation results, which you all heard was really a strong year for foundations, growing at 17% year over year. And Giving USA does provide information on giving by different types of foundations. So we can look at giving by operating foundations, giving by community foundations, and so forth. And for those of you who want to dive deeper into the foundation results, we also have the chapters that Anna has been working on, and the foundation chapter in particular is a great resource. Anna, do you have anything to add in terms of what Giving USA can tell us about the growth in giving across these different spheres, and specifically maybe even drilling down to what we know about DApps in community foundations versus DApps in other domains?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we can see is that donations from donor-advised fund accounts, at least according to the research that's currently available, show to us that the payout rates are quite high and quite a bit higher than we see for other kinds of foundations. So that's one finding that is available to us. And something else that we see is that when we count, when we're thinking about where these things are counted, gifts to a DAF at a community foundation will be in that two foundations category. So we tend to see that category go up, again, pretty much in line with the stock market. So those are some of the trends. As a reminder, the school is actually producing some new research on donor-advised funds, including donor-advised funds at community foundations, that we will be releasing in November of this year. So if you'd like to know more about that topic, I hope that you will keep an eye out for our new research project.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. Dr. Pruitt. Well, here we have another question, and I encourage all of you, as you think about questions or even areas you'd like to learn more about, please feel free to submit them. We are really excited, as you can see, to engage with these questions. One that came in already was about corporate giving. And this year, as we noted, corporate giving was the area that did not perform as strongly compared to the other areas of giving. We do include corporate gifts that are made directly, as well as the gifts that are made through the foundation. What we do not capture, and I have to emphasize that because we know that today corporate giving is much more complex, and marketing dollars or sponsorships that corporations may be engaged in may not be fully reflected in Giving USA. And increasingly, we see corporations expanding other types of corporate social responsibility programs that are focused on talent management or impact investing, lending to small businesses, or even engaging with minority-owned enterprises and vendors. That would not be captured in Giving USA because it would not be a gift to a 501c3. So definitely a lot going on in the corporate sector, and that's certainly an area we need to keep an eye on because, as I mentioned, in 2021, we've seen an uptick in corporate profits that is across many different areas. Anna, there is a question that came in about international giving. That's usually something that I would answer, but I'm going to turn it over to you because help us understand what happened there.
Sure. So I think the question might be actually about giving from the United States to other countries, which the school does have research on. And Una, I'll let you speak to that. But I will speak to the kind of international giving that we count for Giving USA, which is international aid organizations. And really that the meaning of that are organizations that work abroad, but are based here in the United States. That's what we're counting for Giving USA. And we did see increases in that sector this year. We know that in part that was, again, responses to the pandemic, a lot of early responses, to organizations around the world. And we, again, see the corporate sector, foundations playing a big role here, and as well as individuals. So that is what's happening with that sector. I think something to think about is we didn't even start tracking that sector until the late 70s, and we now see that it's quite a significant share of giving. And I think that that tells us something about the importance of this sector over time.
Wonderful. Well, I see some new questions still coming in, and I'll try to answer the two that just came in. One was about whether non-HBCU educational institutions saw growth, and the answer is yes. In fact, one very interesting part of 2020 is that higher educational institutions did receive gifts across many different areas. Specifically, we saw many universities receive support for research around vaccines, vaccine delivery. Many of you know about Dolly Parton's gift to Vanderbilt around vaccine research. I'm sure it made news in your own home city. And that was a gift to an educational institution. So we did see gifts to both HBCUs as well as non-HBCUs. One question that just came in was about millennial giving. I'm going to ask Dr. Anna Pruitt to answer, and it says, what category did millennials largely give to, and what ideas do you have for capturing them?
Well, I should first point out that unfortunately, we're not able to drill down into the Giving USA data quite at that level, but there are some other places that do this, including our philanthropy panel study, where we're able to look at how giving differs by different age groups. And again, the full book, the full report really digs into some of these questions as well. What we typically find is that millennials tend not to be as religious as older generations. So that's certainly a factor. But I think that one of the things that we can also see is that online adoption is increasing for every group. And certainly that is absolutely true for millennials. One thing, I work with a really small organization, and one thing that I'm currently very focused on is making sure that our online donation for mobile is very quick and easy, because we know that people are increasingly on their phones, they're increasingly making gifts on their phones, and we want to make sure that that process is as easy as possible, as few clicks as possible. I think that working with the sort of user design is increasingly important as we work with that on those online tools.
Wonderful. Well, I think those are the bulk of the questions that I have seen come through. I did want to just add that another place we have been studying millennial giving is with our high net worth study. And we see that millennials are very interested in engagement with the nonprofits that they give to. They don't just want to write a check. They also want to see the impact of their gift. And we've also seen millennials give to the environment and to international causes in very large numbers and shares. In terms of ideas for capturing them, I do agree with Anna that mobile and technology are very key, but also increasingly to tailor opportunities to fit what the millennials want. And the best example I give is our own local United Way that used to have a dinner to recognize millennial donors. And the feedback they got was that they didn't want a dinner and a plaque. They would rather have a fun activity, which they suggested bowling. The CEO was a bit surprised. She said, we've never done it before, but she said, okay. And the millennials were thrilled with that opportunity to get together. So the takeaway here is that nonprofits have to meet the donors where they are and understand the needs of these different demographic groups, and also understand that it's not just millennials now. We also have to look at Gen Zs, who are even more acclimated to online platforms and technology. So I think we can wrap up here. We have really enjoyed your questions, learned a lot. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who joined. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you to Lighthouse Council for hosting us this morning. And Dr. Anna Pruitt and I are just very happy to be part of this program, and feel free to send us any additional questions. Anna, any parting words from you?
Again, I would just say thank you to all of you. And exactly as you mentioned, we're eager to hear from you. One of the best parts of working on this project is that we get to hear from nonprofits and try to answer questions as often as we can as part of a service to the field. We really think it's important, and we hope that you do too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your questions. And thank you again, Una and Anna, for your participation today. We really appreciate your sharing your time and expertise with us. Next, we move to the panel discussion on philanthropy and social innovation, moderated by Nashville Post editor Geert de Lombardi. But first, here's a word from Lighthouse Council.
With a great team of volunteer leaders and Lighthouse's sound counsel, we doubled our original campaign goal.
They should retain Lighthouse because they get it.
It's the most positive, collaborative process I've ever been involved with regard to strategic planning.
Our team's passion is to see our clients succeed. Our understanding of strategy and experience guides our clients to fulfill their potential. Nonprofits achieve greater success through Lighthouse Council's Fundraising Council, Strategic Planning Facilitation, and Board Development.
I've worked with a lot of capital council companies. Lighthouse Council is the best.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate the introduction. Hello, I'm Geert de Lombardi, the editor of the Post. It is a pleasure to be here and to be moderating the panel. Let me introduce you to our panelists. Joining us are Farzin Ferdowsi, CEO of Management Resources Company and a board member of the Boys and Girls Club of Tennessee. Farzin is a native of Iran and who has built a company with 80 Taco Bell franchises that employ about 2,000 people. He is also on the board of the Taco Bell Foundation. Also joining us is Kate Chinn. She is Vice President and Head of Community and Civic Engagement at Alliance Bernstein, where she oversees the firm's corporate giving and community engagement efforts. Next to Kate is Scott Perry, CEO of the Memorial Foundation here in the Nashville area. The foundation looks to improve the quality of life for various organizations that it donates to, it gives to, and it's generally considered to be kind of the blue ribbon standard for where it gets involved. And then lastly, over on the far right, as you're looking, is Pete Griffin, President and CEO of Nashville-based nonprofit Musicians on Call, which works around the country to bring live and recorded music to the bedsides of patients. Pete is also active locally as a rescue diver and a swiftwater rescue officer with the Nashville Office of Emergency Management. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you here. I thought we'd start, maybe Pete, we'll start with you because you got to go last in the introductions. Thought we would go down the table maybe and just based on what you've seen here this morning and heard and some of the numbers, kind of share a minute and a half perspective on kind of how you've seen the market here after an incredibly active, busy, life-changing 2020. How have things settled for you? What have you seen that has changed? Kind of what are some of your basic perspectives?
Yeah, I think what the report showed is largely what we saw on the ground here in Nashville and in the markets that we work around the country. Like everybody else, we certainly had to get innovative when it came to not only raising money, but actually executing our programs on the ground, because as an organization that relied on in-person in hospitals, obviously with the pandemic, that's not happening. And so we had to get creative and go virtual. But in doing that, I think we learned a lot. We learned the importance of our messaging, especially for an organization that works on the, we've got one foot in entertainment and the arts, we've got another foot in healthcare. Being able to really focus our messaging on how we were directly responding to the pandemic and supporting frontline caregivers and those affected by the pandemic really helped us to engage with donors that wanted to support, because a lot of times what we were finding were that donors, they wanted to do something related to the pandemic but didn't know where to turn. And so we really tried to provide an offering to support patients and caregivers. And then the other thing is, I think relationships is something that we focused on for so long, but it really came to fruition how important those were last year, because when times got tough, the people and organizations that you had strong relationships with were the ones that continued to stand by your side and support you. And so a lot of times we don't see the fruits of that labor immediately, but during the pandemic, we realized that the time that we had spent in developing and stewarding relationships really helped us out.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, first I would just like to express how proud I am of the nonprofit sector. I think I speak on behalf of all of us, just how incredibly strong and resilient and creative our nonprofit sector has been through this crisis. I think our general public is not aware of the breadth and the extent of our nonprofit sector. So I think one of the silver linings of 2020 was it really heightened the awareness, not only of the need, but the overall critical impact that our nonprofit sector has provided in our community. There's been a mindset shift, I think, among donors. We look more at our giving as less charitable and more as a critically important investment in our community. There's a heightenedness aware of the need, there's a heightenedness, a rise of the engagement of the entire community in being a part of the solution. And I might just add a thing or two about our federal government. For all the criticism of its bureaucracies and its inefficiencies, they stepped up big last year. When you think about the payroll protection program, the CARES Act funding, the small business loans, they did what only they could do. The private sector did not have the capacity to get that kind of money out that quick. And so we've heard from a lot of the nonprofits that we partner with about how that funding and funding from donors in general literally saved the nonprofit sector. They were on the brink of massive layoffs and closures, but instead of going under, they not only survived, but they thrived. They were able to shift resources and to really respond to the needs of our community. So it was quite impressive to watch and be a part of.
So I'm speaking from the corporate giving perspective. And first, I guess I'll talk about AB specifically. We had a very new corporate giving program that we had really launched in Nashville in 2019. And our plan was always to expand that. But 2020 came along. And not only did we want to continue to support the partnerships we had formed in Nashville in 2019, but we're a global firm, and we had to quickly respond in a global way to the pandemic. We did that through supporting frontline workers and distributing PPE. And we also became keenly aware very quickly that there was a disproportionate impact on communities of color and other more vulnerable communities. So our strategy really shifted in that direction, and that has continued, not just in 2020, but we are still very intentionally directing funding towards vulnerable communities in whatever way or whatever strategy we're supporting at the education or frontline workers and that type of thing. So I think that in general, that data was so interesting to me because I know that people in general want to help if they can. And I think that the conditions that happened in 2020 with the pandemic, I think that individuals that were able to step up really wanted to step up. And I think that foundations also had a little bit of flexibility to go bigger in that year. I think the CARES funding and other government stimulus also really bridged the gap and gave people confidence that we were going to get through this. And then finally, the market rebound at the end of the year really, it gave people more capital to put into philanthropy. So that was my take on sort of more generally speaking, the response in 2020.
Farzin, go ahead.
I will be coming to you and talking about Boys and Girls Club, so forth.
Please do.
Well, I'm going to talk about as an individual because I'm not involved except on the board seats of the nonprofit. For an individual that when he was 18 years old, he came to America, and because of the persecution of our religion in Iran, decided to stay in America and make a life for himself and the family. I think America is the most charitable country, and their people are the most charitable people in the world. I have been to 60 different countries and pretty much familiar with the culture, but nowhere in the world you will find private individual opening their pocketbook and giving for the sake of helping their humankind. And I am proud to be an American now, and I hope that we will pass on this to our children, because giving is a learning process. And I hope the people who do personal giving, they should have their children involved in this so they can learn and see how joy it is being able to help other people.
I thought it was very interesting that the report mentioned how many people were new to giving at all for the first time last year in the midst of all the changes. Farzin, as a board member, how do you approach that from a fundraising perspective versus maybe the traditional role that a board member might have had? Does it change things to try to find those new people?
Yeah, as you know, we are going through a whole lot of changes. I mean, we have to learn a lot. It looks like the whole society is going through changes. So I think this technology is very important to get into the millennials. And then, you know, on giving, relationship has a lot to do with it. And I don't know how you do relationship with technology. So that's somehow that you have to find your way. And in Boys and Girls Club, we are trying to get more online and do things. We emphasize service in our Boys and Girls Club for the individual who are giving to this organization, to see how the children are giving back by serving the community and going and doing their different things.
Scott, was there a similar dynamic for you all at the foundation in terms of having to do more work online and maybe having different types of interactions last year? How did things change as the year went on in terms of relationships that you had and relationships that you wanted to have?
Well, everything was remote. So we quickly ramped up on Zoom conferencing and had a lot of meetings interactively with our nonprofit partners. But I might just say that, you know, technology is certainly a great avenue for enhancing giving. But fundamentally, and I think development staffs, communication staffs play a vital role in getting the message out on what the need is and how their particular organizations are addressing those needs. That's how you really engage the community and engage giving. 2020 really helped catapult that. I think the nonprofit sector in general is a well-kept secret. And so unlike anything we've ever seen before COVID, everybody knew about it. It was well known around the world. The magnitude of it was significant. No one was immune from the risk and the threats of it. And so I think that if we can just take that momentum of awareness of the needs out there in our community and the roles that the nonprofit sectors play, it can be critically important for future giving.
Pete, you mentioned these great long-term relationships that really paid off for you as you were looking to ramp up your services during the pandemic. You're the chief fundraiser as the CEO of the organization. How did you change what you were doing? What did you focus on versus maybe a more normal year?
Sure. You know, it's interesting because actually the change started internally. I think my first priority was to make sure the culture of our organization and our staff were taken care of first and foremost, because like anything else, you can have a great plan, a great strategy, but if you don't have the right people and they're not motivated and feeling safe and secure in what they're doing, it's not going to go anywhere. And so we spent a lot of time internally just making sure the staff was supported, and we had a clear direction on where we were going, which was allocating all of our resources to build out our virtual program. But from there, you know, the individual relationships that we had and the with people that either worked at corporations or were donors of ours became critically important. For the first phase of it, I would say, was that it was checking in. It was just the humanity of it. I just wanted to make sure that people were doing well, that, how were they affected? How were their families affected? How was their health? How were their businesses affected? So for the first number of months, I wasn't making any asks. I really wanted to make sure that people knew, this was bigger than supporting and their dollars. It was more about, as humans, are we all doing together? Can we support one another? And then after that, we spent a lot of time really cultivating those relationships virtually. Actually working with Lighthouse Council, we started using this platform called CauseVid, which allowed us to, send videos to people where I must have recorded, I think the staff counted nearly 1,000 video messages that were just to a specific person, thanking them for their support, checking in, giving them an update. And I could tell you, off of those videos, I think we raised over $50,000 unsolicited, just people that were touched, that we took the time to reach out to them and check in on them. And so a lot of those innovations and uses of technology, we did it because we wanted to maintain personal relationships, but they actually helped strengthen the bond that people had to our mission and our organization, which in turn led to increased support throughout the year.
Did you want to chime in?
Well, I from a corporate perspective, how would you like me to answer that?
Well, I thought you were ready to say something, but my next question is for you anyway.
Okay.
So
yeah.
we're good. But the report mentioned that corporate giving actually fell a little bit as a percentage of the total. And Pete mentioned kind of those first couple of weeks and months, we all did this, right? We were all just like, okay, I'm going to see what's happening. I'm just going to make sure my people are good, and then we'll figure out what's going on. Was that part of the dynamic that you saw at AB? Just especially with some of the communities of the vulnerable communities that you mentioned, that you wanted to make sure that you lined up your ducks a little more, and that may have contributed to some of the relative drop in spending?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that was striking to me, watching and seeing that corporate giving fell, because it didn't feel like that at AB. And it didn't fall at AB, but just across the board, it's really interesting to me that it dipped. I do think that the corporation's first job was to ensure that their employees were safe and to ensure they all had remote access so that they could continue working. And that was Alliance Bernstein's first priority as well. But then I feel like we immediately shifted to how can we help? And we immediately formed sort of a global task force to look at the ways that we as a corporation could support the communities where we live and work. So yes, is the answer to that question. I do think, I thought about this a little bit. I don't think that it's a downward trend in giving for corporations. I think that a lot of the budgets that coming into any year depend on the pre-tax profits of the year before. And so corporations are not as flexible as individuals or foundations within the year. So that's one factor. And the other factor is that I think they are getting a lot of pressure from employees to increase their corporate social responsibility. So I don't think that I would be surprised if this continues to go down. I think it will go up.
Makes sense intuitively, yeah. Scott, in terms of foundations growing their share of giving steadily, that was a trend that was illustrated in that report pretty clearly. You're able to plan out things a little more maybe than someone in Kate's role. What do you see as in terms of trends for foundation giving as a whole when you talk to your peers? What do you hear? What do you tell them? Kind of what's the lay of the land on the whole?
Well, just looking at those statistics earlier, impressive that foundations really stepped up. I'm not sure that will continue. I think at some point that's going to level off. Many of us in the foundation world got way out ahead of our budgets early on last year. It was intentional. It didn't catch us flat-footed. We had a number of emergency call meetings of our board making recommendations on how to get funds out quick. But I think that over time, we will move in a direction towards more traditional levels of giving based on our asset sizes with an eye on long-term sustainability so that we can remain relevant and responsive to future needs.
And a quick follow-up in terms of some of the trends that were mentioned in the report, the arts and the culture and health organizations being down. On one level, that makes sense. But on the other, it's also something that that's a gap that needs to be actively looking at, reallocating sectors based on what's happened in the past year and a half.
Well, unique to the Memorial Foundation, we're from the cell of a hospital. We're a hospital conversion foundation. So in times of crisis in our community, we really get honed in on health and human services. And that is certainly what we did last year in responding to those basic essential needs in our community. You know, I was striking the areas that took reductions in giving. Arts and the arts community, I think in general, was viewed by the community as non-essential. Many of them had to close to the public, which was devastating to these organizations because they have heavy dependence on that front gate ticket sale. But they did what they had to do to survive. I was a bit perplexed by a reduction in health, unique in Tennessee, where we've had a number of rural hospital closures. We have a significant amount of our population that is either uninsured or underinsured. We really focused on our increase in supporting health as a very essential service that our community needs. So that was a bit puzzling to me to see that health was down. Education certainly has gotten a lot of attention with all the stay-at-home orders. It really profiled and highlighted the differences between the haves and the have-nots. Private schools and affluent communities were able to respond much more appropriately and timely with technology and getting kids back in the classroom, unlike our public school systems were able to do. So I can certainly understand where education got an increase.
Farzin, in terms of the CARES Act, one-time things that happened, there was a lot of noise in the market. As a board member and as a donor or as an individual, has that settled? Do you have a clearer view of the available help that might be out there for Boys and Girls Clubs or other organizations? Is there a better sense strategically of, okay, this is what we can commit to in the next couple of years as an organization?
Well, I'm not sure about the $300 CARES Act tax deductible, how much that help, because people give their tax returns to their accountants and they do it and they take the deduction. I mean, how is that going to make them write a check for charity? But for us at Boys and Girls Club, we have been very lucky and careful that we have got our donors stepping up, doing better job for us, and our budget actually is going up because we have plans of reaching 10,000 kids, and we are doing 5,000 now. So we are trying to double up our reach in the community, and we are in very, very good shape.
As we start to try to wrap up here, one of the thoughts that kept recurring to me from the report and the authors mentioned, there's the resilience and the innovation, that balancing act of hanging in there but changing what you're doing. It's across the board. It's across everywhere. Everybody had to draw that line and figure out how much do we hang in there, how much do we have to change what we're doing. Pete, as you look at your organization, what comes to mind from the past year that you mentioned you changed, that's carrying forward, that's lasting, and what maybe is more of a temporary transitional type of change that may go away?
Yeah, I think from the program perspective, doing virtual programs was something that we always thought was going to be complementary to what we do. Obviously, last year, it was all of what we did. And so moving forward, yes, we are excited next year to start in-person programs again, but virtual is not going anywhere. We've realized that is a great way to reach underserved communities that we can't get to in person on a regular basis. And so that will always be a part of our mix moving forward. And so in that sense, that the innovation that the pandemic forced upon us is something that's really going to help our business in the long term. And then the other thing too, I think, as we talk about, PPP loans, I think the other thing it helped us realize was how important our investment in infrastructure was years ago. Because as I talked with other nonprofits last year and trying to help them navigate what was going on, one of the things I realized is that those investments in technology, the investments we did in our back end and accounting and infrastructure allowed us to respond quickly to the changing environments of these loans. And these loans, I mean, they were moving the end zone after the game had ended. It was constantly changing. And so our ability to, get report data, report financials quickly as more things were asked has helped us. And so that's something that I think we will make sure that we stay focused on is keeping our infrastructure strong so that we can report out as we need to donors and people that support us.
Scott, is that something you're seeing with organizations that you're working with? Is that responsiveness is improving? Is that a lasting legacy from the past year and a half and all the change that we've had to endure?
I think so. They have really demonstrated what they've always been able to demonstrate, in my view, their responsiveness and nimbleness to the needs of our community. Just speaking of the Boys and Girls Club is a great example of the after-school programs out there. What's critical about those programs is the relationships that they have with those children and their families. And during the time of crisis, they were able to shift and leverage those relationships and help get food and aid and support. They knew the needs of those those families and those kids and responded very properly. And so it was a great investment for us to continue to support after school programs, even though they weren't in person and they weren't traditionally being delivered.
And maybe last question for Kate and Farzin here. As you look to the rest of 2021, what is it that you're paying attention to, maybe as a marker, as an event or a trend that you'd like to see to give you more sense of, okay, this is where we're headed now going forward?
Well, I think for us, we're preset. We have our plan. We had it at the end of 2020. So what the silver lining of 2020 was for us was that we were forced to expand quickly and make sure we were having a global lens on all of our giving. It was great that it had started in Nashville and we had really built that program out and it served as our model. But now in 2021, we have a grants program in Asia Pacific. We have a grants program in Europe and we have a grants program in New York. And I'm so heartened that we were able to change that so quickly in 2020 and really continue on with full, robust programs. And I also just want to take a second to echo Scott and Pete and just say, I have been so impressed at the nonprofit sector. They have absolutely gone above and beyond with very little resource, with not ideal situations, doing things virtually, and they've all risen to the occasion, and it has been very heartwarming. So I just want to say that.
If you allow me, I have one paragraph from some of the writings of the Baha'i Faith, which I'm a member of, that talks about charity and philanthropy. I read that for you. Man reaches perfection through good deeds, voluntarily performed, not through good deeds, the doing of which was forced upon him. And sharing is a personally chosen righteous act. That is, the rich should extend assistance to the poor. They should expend their substance for the poor, but their own free will, and not because the poor have gained this end by force. For the harvest of force is turmoil and the ruin of the social order. On the other hand, voluntary sharing, the freely chosen expending of one's substance, leadeth the society's comfort and peace. It lightens up the world. it bestows honor upon humankind. So that's what I go by.
It's a good way to end it. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Farzin, thank you. Kate, thank you. Scott, Pete, thank you very much. Appreciate your all's insight and expertise. And with that, I will give it back to Harry.
Thank you, Geert, Kate, Pete, Scott, and Farzin. What a great panel you were. Thank you to our audience also for your participation today. Thank you to our media sponsor, the Nashville Post, and to our host, Moan McAllister Norton. We are pleased in the spirit of philanthropy to have brought you insight from leading experts on philanthropy and nonprofits. I hope that today's program has inspired ideas and discussions around the way nonprofit board members and staff can have greater success in fulfilling their mission. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out if we can be of service to you. Our best wishes for a safe and happy summer.